What are the Lakers doing? And dang, the Mavs are killing it so far. We got a fun one for y'all today. Let's get it. Alright, so today we got a kind of a fun video for y'all. We're going to be mixing these into our current event news. But this is going to be grading every team's offseason so far. So, pretty much I'm going to go through all 30 teams. I'm going to tell y'all what they've done through the offseason so far, what they've done in the draft that has been good, you know what I mean? And stuff like that. We're going to just be kind of breaking it down, seeing how well they do, some surprises that maybe we haven't seen so far yet. And things that they maybe can improve on. But to get into it, we're going to start with the Atlanta Hawks. And the Atlanta Hawks, for me, are going to actually, which this might be a not a great opinion by some, but they're actually going to get a D from me. I didn't like the Richardson pick at number 1. I didn't think that was the guy. I thought they should have traded back. But something that they've done, they have not re-signed anybody, but they've added Dyson Daniels, E.J. Liddell, Larry Nance Jr., and Cody Zeller, who are 4 just solid NBA players. And then A.J. Griffin has departed in a trade, and DeJounte Murray was obviously the big guy that they lost. The Hawks get a D for me because I don't think they still, for the last 3 years, they have not known where they're going. What is the direction that they want to go in? They've been able to compete, but at times they are not good. At times they are great, and at times they are horrible. So what is the path that the Hawks want to take? Because they've got the number 1 overall pick, but then they've also still got Trae Young on their roster who wants to win now. So this team does not make much sense. They get a D from me. Celtics, a team that, in my opinion, has killed the offseason so far. They get an A- from me. And the only reason that they're not an A+ is because I think some of their guys, it's going to be tough down the road to have to pay everybody and have to keep this core together. But right now, they have killed it. They've re-signed Luke Cornett. They've re-signed Neemias Queta, who is 2 guys who did not play much of the playoffs. But they re-signed Jason Tatum on a 5-year Supermax extension. They re-signed Xavier Tillman, who was decent for them in the playoffs. And then they re-signed Derek White, which was a big piece that they needed to do. And they were able to get it done. But besides that, they added Baylor Shireman in the draft, and just guys who could come in and play now still. And keeping this core together was the main point the Celtics needed to do in the offseason. So far, they've killed it. They get an A- from me. All right, let's get into the next one. The Brooklyn Nets. They are going to be the first one to get an F so far in this one. The Brooklyn Nets have done horrible in the offseason so far, to be totally honest. They're probably going to be the worst team in the NBA next season. This is tough for their fans, tough for their front office, tough for the organization. But they've re-signed Nick Claxton. They've added Bojan Bogdanovic. They've added Mamadi Diakite, who is not a guy who will play. Shake Milton has also joined in a sign and trade with the Knicks. And they lost Keita Bates-Diop, and they lost Mikal Bridges. That was the big guy they lost. They didn't have a direction where they wanted to go. And they do get an F. Even though they did get a ton of picks for Mikal Bridges, they still get an F for me. Because they haven't done anything. I don't think that Nick Claxton is a guy that you should have re-signed. I think you should just have let him walk. And they did not do great in the draft. So this Nets team gets an F for me in the offseason so far. Let's move into a team who has been worse in general in the past few years as a run organization, the Charlotte Hornets. They get a C- for me, which is actually not that bad. The only reason they're pretty low is because I didn't like the Tajon Salon pick at number 6. I think he could have traded back and gotten him later, or gotten someone even better at 6. They re-signed Miles Bridges, which is a great re-sign for them. They added Josh Green in a trade, which is a great spot for him to be. He can develop there. That is a great spot. They also added Reggie Jackson, which was kind of a weird pickup in a trade with the Nuggets. And then Davis Bertans was waived. Bryce McGowan was waived. And Alex Pokusevski, who was a first-round pick a couple years ago, has also been waived. I didn't love the draft from the Hornets, but they've been fine. They didn't lose Miles Bridges, and their season really next year is going to all determine on injuries. They can be a pretty decent team if they don't have as many injuries. All right, let's get into the Chicago Bulls. The Chicago Bulls actually get a B+ for me. I was very impressed with what they've done so far in the offseason. They re-signed Patrick Williams a couple days ago on a 5-year deal, which is something that they needed to do. That was a guy that they drafted at number 4 2 years ago, who has not been great, but he's shown flashes here and there. So they were able to re-sign him. They added Chris Duarte in the trade a couple days ago with DeMar DeRozan, which is a video out on the channel right now. Go watch it. They added Josh Giddey in the trade with Alex Caruso, and they added Jalen Smith on a 3-year deal. They took him away from the Pacers. But the reason that they're not any higher than a B+ is because the departures are so tough. They lost Andre Drummond, who was so great last year. They lost Alex Caruso, and they lose DeMar DeRozan. 3 just amazing, solid NBA players. But the reason that they're so high is because I think they got the steal of the draft in Modest Buzelis. I think that kid is going to be a stud, and I think it was a great pick that they got at 11, who should have, in my opinion, been a top 5 guy. All right, let's move into Cleveland Cavaliers. I really wanted to give them an F, but I couldn't. They get a D. They did one thing in this offseason so far. They also got Jalen Tyson, I believe, in the draft from Cal at number 20. But they re-signed Donovan Mitchell on a 3-year extension. But besides that, they have literally done nothing. And this team we saw went to 7 against a young Orlando team that should not have been ready. They went to 7 against them, and then they lost in 5 to the Celtics. This team cannot contend right now. So I'm just surprised that there has not been any more moves done. So they get a D for me. I really wanted to give them an F, but they re-signed Donovan Mitchell, which is something they really need to do. The Dallas Mavericks. Man, I was this close to giving him an A-, and then I realized I forgot Derrick Jones Jr. has left. And let's get into the departures. Josh Green, who was a great guy for them 2 years ago, who was okay in the playoffs. Tim Hardaway Jr., who was a guy who we thought was going to leave. And then, Derrick Jones Jr., who was so great last year, they had to lose. But they added Quentin Grimes, they added Najee Marshall, and then they obviously added Klay Thompson. They get an A- for me because I believe that was the best move of the entire offseason so far, was Klay Thompson to Dallas. I really do love how he's going to fit into this team, and I've got a video out on that as well. You can go watch that. It's a great one. But Klay Thompson is a guy who can immediately come in and just help your team out. He can help with exactly what y'all needed. Corner threes and shooting and a little bit of defense is exactly what they needed, and they can maybe get over that hump and win a championship. So the Mavericks get an A- for me so far. Now we get into the Nuggets, who have not done a lot, but they've lost a good amount. So they get a D for me. They have not had a good offseason at all. They obviously lost KCP, which was a guy who was so good in that championship run. And he was very vital to this team. He was a starter. And Reggie Jackson, who was a great guy off the bench, who they needed in the playoffs 2 years ago, and they needed even this year to come off the bench and help. And then they added Dario Saric, who I think is a great pickup from the Nuggets. I think that's a guy who, in my opinion, if he was out there, go get him, right? If you can get him, go get him. They didn't re-sign anybody, but this is still a very good team, so don't get an F from me, but they do get a D. They did okay in the draft, but I didn't think they did great. The Pistons. Man, I was expecting to come in here and immediately give the Pistons a D. Just off the top of my head, give them a D. They actually got a B for me. When I really looked over it, they got a B for me. I actually really liked Ron Holland that they picked at 5. It might have been a reach, but I really like the kid. I think he's going to be a really good player. He was supposed to go number 2 overall about a year ago, and then, his draft stock fell. But they re-signed Cade Cunningham, and then they re-signed Simone Fontecchio, who I think Fontecchio is going to be a heck of a player for the Pistons this year. I think with a new coach, with J.B. Bickerstaff coming in, I think he can really help some of these younger guys get over the hump. And I think Cade Cunningham, you had to re-sign him. He was your first overall pick a couple years ago. He's played good in the minutes that he's had, but, just the injuries have been tough. They added Malik Beasley. They added Tim Hardaway Jr. They added Tobias Harris and Wendell Moore Jr., who are 4 solid NBA players. They might have overpaid for Tobias Harris, but they get him back in Detroit, and I don't hate that move. And then they lose Quentin Grimes. They lose James Wiseman, 2 guys who were, they were okay. James Wiseman has not been a good player, so I'm actually very impressed with the Pistons have done this offseason. But because they didn't swing any big moves or anything, they get a B, and I think they overpaid for Tobias Harris just a little bit. The Warriors, for me, this is going to be a surprise to y'all, but they get an A- for me. The Warriors have had, and I'll ramble a little bit here, they have had my favorite offseason out of any of the teams. And while they did lose Klay Thompson and did lose Dario Saric and did lose Chris Paul, 3 really solid, good NBA players who bring a veteran attitude to everything that they do, you lost those guys. But the people that they brought in, I am so impressed with what they've been able to do. If they can figure it out and eventually get Lauri Markkanen here to Golden State, this team can immediately contend again. They added Kyle Anderson, who has been a great role player for the T-Wolves the past couple of years. They added Buddy Hield, who is now being called Steph Curry's splash buddy instead of the Splash Bros. Him and Steph Curry have actually been the highest three-point percentage shooters in the last 10 years. Clay's number 3. Buddy Hield's one of the best three-point shooters ever. And you just added him with probably the best three-point shooter ever. Like, this was an amazing move, in my opinion. They added DeAnthony Melton because people were saying that their defense needed work. DeAnthony Melton's a heck of a defender. And they added Lindy Waters, who is a guy who can show that he's been able to play throughout the regular season. Maybe not in the playoffs, but he can be a depth piece in that rotation. The Golden State Warriors, I have been very impressed with what they have done in the offseason so far. And I am excited. I'm genuinely excited to watch them play. I wasn't excited after Klay Thompson left, but with everything they've done now, I'm excited to watch them play, especially Buddy Hield and Steph Curry. It's going to be fun. All right, let's get into now the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets are going to get an F for me. They didn't do much in this offseason. They re-signed Aaron Holiday, and then they added A.J. Griffin. No one left, but they didn't get better. They didn't make the playoffs last year, and they did not get better than they were last year. They said there was a chance that they wanted to try to spring a trade for Kevin Durant. They were not able to do that. Maybe next year they'll be able to do that. Maybe they want to wait. Maybe they just want to let their young guys develop. I don't know. They haven't done much, and they weren't good last year, and they're probably not going to be good this year. They get an F for me. Tough offseason for Rockets fans. Indiana Pacers. This is one that I wasn't really keeping up with, so I really just didn't know what the Pacers were going to be like coming into this. But right now, from what I'm seeing, they get a C+ for me. And that's mid-tier, right? It's all right. And they re-signed Pascal Siakam, which is a guy who really did work in this offense. He was very, very impressive. Him and Tyrese Halliburton were fun to watch. And then they re-signed Obi Toppin, who was a guy who was so good in the playoffs for them. Such a good role player last year. Great re-signs from them. They added James Wiseman, who's okay. I mean, it can be your backup big. Maybe instead of Isaiah Jackson, maybe that's the guy you want to go with. And then Jalen Smith is tough to lose because he is one of your younger big men that you wanted to maybe develop. You did lose him to the Bulls. But besides that, Pacers did a pretty good job. They did pretty good in the draft. Their second-round picks were very good. They got Johnny Furphy, I believe, in the second round down there. So very, very decent offseason from the Pacers. And, they got better and they kept the guys that they needed to keep. All right, LA Clippers. This was one that I was immediately going to get an F to, but I ended up giving them a D. They re-signed James Harden on a 2-year deal. Probably way too much money for James Harden, if I'm being completely honest. With his age, it was 2 years, $70 million. That's an insane amount of money for a guy that's that old. And they added Nicholas Batum, and they added Mo Bamba, who are 2 guys who can come in and immediately play for you. But they lost Paul George, and they lost Mason Plumlee. When you lose a guy like Paul George, who was probably, the second best player on the market this year, you lost him. You immediately go down to D, and yeah, they're going to stay right there at D because I think some of their additions bring them a little bit up from F. All right, Lakers, and you can probably see from the thumbnail they're getting an F for me. This has been a horrible offseason from Rob Pelinka and the Los Angeles Lakers. The one bright spot that they got was getting Dalton Connect at 17 in the draft. And they drafted Bronny James, which I was not mad at. I like Bronny. I think it's smart. You literally get LeBron James' son. You make sure that he is going to stay. And he ends up re-signing on that 2-year deal. And they also get Max Christie returning on a 4-year deal, who's a guy that I think J.J. Redick's going to do very well with. But besides that, Taurean Prince departed for the Bucks, but they haven't added anything. This team was not good last year. They were the 7 seed, and they went out in 5 to the Nugget. They were not good last year. They have to add more pieces. And I don't know. I think D'Lo has to be a guy who has to go. I like D'Lo, but I think he's not going to work in LA. I think he has to go. Just not a good offseason from Rob Pelinka. Not a good offseason from the Lakers. And this was a shocker to me. The Memphis Grizzlies are going to be next. They also get an F from me because they have literally done nothing. They have literally done nothing except draft Zach Edey. That was the only thing they've done this entire offseason. They haven't re-signed anybody, haven't added anybody, no one's departed. Literally, it's none. Nothing has happened in Memphis. They get an F because, I don't think this team can go win a championship next year. Maybe they believe they can. I don't like the Zach Edey pick at 9. I think they could have traded back and gotten him, in my opinion, way lower. Next up, we've got the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat are going to get a D for me. Again, some bad grades coming on right now. But they re-signed Thomas Bryant and they re-signed Kevin Love, two guys who, were good for them last season. And then they added Alec Burks, who was very good for the Knicks last year. I liked that. And then Caleb Martin departed, but they haven't been able to do anything. This team is not good. I've said this year after year after year. This team is not that good. And they're not going to be able to contend in the East, and I don't understand why they're not trying to spring a big trade or rebuild. This is a very just underwhelming offseason for the Heat. They get a D. All right, next up we got the Bucks. The Bucks, they had an underwhelming offseason in my opinion. They get a C- from me. The Bucks added Taurean Prince and they added DeLon Wright, two guys who can come in and play now and help the team win. But they also lost Malik Beasley, who was great up until the trade deadline last year. He was amazing. He was probably the best shooter in the league up until the trade deadline. They lose him, and I didn't think they did well in the draft. They went for younger guys, and that doesn't really mesh with their timeline, so it didn't really make sense. I gave them a C-. It was underwhelming for me. Next up, we got the Minnesota Timberwolves. Timberwolves, I think, is probably my second favorite offseason they've had. They also get an A-. They re-signed Luke Garza, who is a guy who is a fan favorite, so I think that's a good re-sign for them. They also added PJ Dozier, and Joe Ingles, two guys who agreed on one-year deal who can come in and help now. And then their departures. That's the one thing where I couldn't give them that A+, because their departures, that was a good amount. Kyle Anderson left, Jordan McLaughlin left, Wendell Moore Jr. and Monte Morris, all guys who were pretty good last year, except for Wendell Moore. He didn't play much, but Monte Morris was a great guy off the bench. Kyle Anderson was great off the bench, and Jordan McLaughlin was also great in the minutes that he had. But the reason that their A is so high is that I think they had the best draft out of anybody. They got Rob Dillingham at 8, who they traded with the Spurs to get, who is a guy who I think is going to be the best successor to Mike Conley that you can get. Rob Dillingham was my favorite prospect coming in. And they get Terrence Shannon Jr. down there at 27, who is a guy who should have gone top 10, but because of the off-the-court stuff, he didn't end up doing it. And he is a heck of a player, and he can come in and win now. Great moves by the Timberwolves. They have a great offseason grade from me so far. Next up, we got the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans, for me, are going to get a B-. That might be a little low, but let me take y'all through it. They re-signed no one. They added DeJounte Murray, who was the big add, and that's why the grades would be so high, is because they did that. But their departures, man, this is why they couldn't get that A for me. They couldn't even get the B+. They got the B- because their departures are so heavy. They lost Dyson Daniels. They lost E.J. Liddell, who I think was going to be a really good NBA player if he just got more minutes. They lost Najee Marshall, who was so great for them last year. They lost Larry Nance, who was great for them last year. They lost Jonas Valanciunas, and they lost Cody Zeller. All 6 of these guys are guys who actually played on their roster. It wasn't just into the bench guys, except E.J. Liddell. He dealt with injuries. But besides that, all guys who played last year and made good impacts last year. That's why the Pelicans, I'm a little worried, and they get a B- for me. The Knicks. So the Knicks are going to be the only team, or I think it's maybe the second team, that gets just a straight-up A for me. The Knicks killed the offseason, in my opinion. They re-signed OG Anunoby on a 5-year deal, which is a guy who I didn't think they were going to be able to get because, obviously with all the money that they've got swirling around right now, I was not expecting them to be able to sign OG or re-sign OG. But the Knicks, they also added Mikal Bridges, which was the big trade that everyone was excited about. They got the Nova Knicks completely together. And then the departures, Bojan Bogdanovic, Alec Burks, and Isaiah Hartenstein. And the only reason I didn't give him an A+ offseason was because Isaiah Hartenstein left, and that was a guy for them who was so good last year. You're going to have to rely on Mitchell Robinson. And Shake Milton also left. Not a guy who played for them last year. But so I actually loved the Knicks offseason. They didn't do great in the draft, but because they got Mikal Bridges and they re-signed OG, this team is top 3 in the East, and they're going to contend for a championship next year. So great moves from the Knicks. Really liked that one. Next, we'll go into the OKC Thunder. They re-signed Isaiah Joe and they re-signed Aaron Wiggins, 2 guys who have played for them, who are young, who are good pieces. And they added Alex Caruso and they added Isaiah Hartenstein, 2 guys who can come in, play now. The Alex Caruso was one of the best moves of the offseason for me, probably the second best move in my opinion. And they lost Josh Giddey, who was a guy who I think just didn't fit in with this roster anymore. When do we ever give up on a 21-year-old's development? That's exactly what OKC did, and a lot of the fans did, and the front office did. So I think it was time to get rid of Josh Giddey. And Lindy Waters also departed, but not really a guy who really helped them much, especially in the playoffs last year. So yeah, they get a B+ for me. The Thunder, I think they had a very good offseason, but their draft was a little underwhelming, and I think they need to figure out how to do something with those picks. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, especially at the trade deadline next year. Orlando Magic, man, I loved the Magic's offseason. They get an A- for me. They re-signed 5 different guys. Goga Badatse, who's a guy who a lot of teams really wanted. They re-signed Gary Harris, who is a great perimeter defender. They re-signed Jonathan Isaac, who was one of the best defenders 3 years ago, probably the best in the league 3 or 4 years ago. And then they re-signed Franz Wagner, and they re-signed Mo Wagner. 2 guys who they needed to get back for sure. And then they added KCP, who was just out of the blue. I was not expecting the Magic to end up getting him. They did. Great spot for him. And then Joe Ingles left, but that was not a guy who fit your timeline. It didn't really work out there. I didn't like that pickup when it happened, and it never really worked. So they get an A- for me. And the reason that they're not getting an A or an A+ is because I think Franz Wagner got paid a little bit too much. I don't think that he was worth the max extension, but maybe you had to offer it to him to get him to stay there. But besides that, Magic killed the offseason so far. 76ers. This is going to be I think there's 2 teams now that are going to get an A. The 76ers get an A because they got the best guy on the market. They added Paul George, but they also added 3 amazing role players in Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon, and Caleb Martin, who can all come in and help you win now. The Sixers have immediately become a top 3 team in the East. They also re-signed Tyrese Maxey, and they re-signed Kelly Oubre, 2 guys who they need to re-sign. They especially need to re-sign Maxey, but Kelly Oubre, Tyrese Maxey didn't get re-signed, but he reached an extension. And Kelly Oubre, a guy who they thought could end up leaving, didn't end up leaving. So that's great. And then the departures, they lost Nicholas Batum, who was okay there. They lost Mo Bamba, who didn't really play. And they're not getting A+ just because they lost D'Anthony Melton and they lost Buddy Hield, 2 guys who, could have really helped this team win. I don't think they would have been able to keep Buddy Hield, but D'Anthony Melton was definitely a guy who I thought they could keep. Next one, we got the Phoenix Suns. The Suns are going to get a B for me. I actually didn't hate the Suns offseason this time around. They re-signed Bol Bol, who's a guy who actually is a fan favorite and could actually play for them. He showed us good sparks throughout the season. Damian Lee returned on a 1-year deal, who didn't play last year because of a leg injury, but most likely he will play next year. One of the best 3-point shooters in the league when he left. And then Royce O'Neal returned on a new 4-year deal, which was a guy that they got at the trade deadline last year, who can really play and can help this team reach another level shooting-wise and defensive-wise. They also added Monte Morris and added Mason Plumlee, 2 guys who, again, add to your depth. And Monte Morris, a guy who's a playmaker and a point guard and something they've been looking for. And then they lost Drew Eubanks and lost Eric Gordon, 2 guys I expected to leave in the offseason, not much there. And then I think they killed the draft, getting Ryan Dunn that late and be able to trade back one of the best, probably the best perimeter defender in the draft. Next up, we got the Trailblazers. The Trailblazers are going to get a C+ for me. Again, another underwhelming offseason so far. They didn't re-sign anybody, and they added Denny Avdia, who from that Wizards trade, and they traded Malcolm Brogdon. But they got a younger guy in the trade, so I didn't hate that. And then they got Donovan Clingan, which really boosted their rating for me, adding Donovan Clingan, because in my opinion, he should have gone number 1, and he dropped to 7. So I think that was a really good spot for the Blazers, and they were able to pick him up. Next up, we got the Kings. I just made a video on DeMar DeRozan. It should be out. Yeah, it is out. And they get a B+ from me because I think the Kings have done a very good job at the offseason so far, but I'll tell you why they're not higher than you would think. But B+ is still a very good rating. They re-signed Alex Len and they re-signed Malik Monk, which is two guys who I think they needed to re-sign. Alex Len maybe could have left, but they added DeMar DeRozan, which we talked about on the other video. I won't talk about it much here, but when you get DeMar DeRozan in, you get a really good player. They added Jalen McDaniels, who I'm a big fan of, and they added Jordan McLaughlin, who's a good pickup. But the reason that their rating's not higher is because of some of the guys they lost. Sasha Vezenkov was supposed to be a really good player for them. Didn't end up working out. Harrison Barnes also left. Davion Mitchell left, who I talked about in the other video. I love Davion Mitchell, and I really wanted him to stay in the Kings uniform, but he wasn't able to. And then Chris Duarte. Two of those young guys, Chris Duarte and Davion Mitchell, who are guys who was helping kind of move forward your younger depth on the bench. So it stinks to see them leave, but they still get a B+ for me. The Spurs. I was expecting to give them a higher rating, but they actually only get a B for me. Because I was thinking because of the Chris Paul and because of everything else, I think they should get an A. They ended up getting a B because they didn't really do much. I'm being totally honest. They added Harrison Barnes and they added Chris Paul, who are two veterans who I talked about in the other video I really like. And then Devontae Graham left. But besides that, they haven't done much. So I can't give them a crazy high grade. I really like Stephon Castle at the 4th pick, but I really think you should have kept Rob Dillingham. I don't think you should have traded him. I think he could have worked in really, really well with his offense. So that's why they get a lower rating. I think their offseason so far has been pretty underwhelming besides getting in Chris Paul. So I think the Spurs are a team to look out for next year, but their offseason so far has not been, super stellar. Next up, we got 3 more left. We got the Toronto Raptors. They're going to be re-signing Scotty Barnes. They're re-signing Emmanuel Quickley, and they're re-signing Garrett Temple. Not much to say about this. Scotty Barnes got his max. He should have. And Emmanuel Quickley also got a max extension. He got a very good deal for him, a guy they got at the trade deadline last year. So I really, really, really like that Emmanuel Quickley is going to stay in Toronto. I'm a big fan of him. So I like that by them. They're getting a C+ because they also added Davion Mitchell, and they added Sasha Vezenkov, who's going to actually end up going back to Europe. He won't stay here. And then they lost Jalen McDaniels. So just another underwhelming offseason, honestly, from the Raptors. I believe, let me go look at exactly who they got in the draft, because I don't remember. They got Jacob Walter from Baylor, I really liked him as a prospect. But then they got Jonathan Mogbo in the 2nd round at the 1st pick. Not kind of underwhelming in my opinion in the draft. But besides that, the Raptors get a C+. They've been all right. Next up, we got the Jazz. Another kind of underwhelming offseason, but I'll tell you why their rating's going to be so high. They get a B+ for me. They re-signed nobody. They added Drew Eubanks, which I don't know why, but they did. And then Chris Dunn left, who's a guy who I really wanted to stay in Utah. He really helped some of the young guys over there. And then Omer Yurtseven, who barely played last year, also leaves, or he was waived. But the reason the Jazz are so high is because I think they won the draft. Maybe the Timberwolves won it, but they're also a winner of the draft. Let me take y'all through what they were able to get in the draft and how they were able to get it. They first got Cody Williams at number 10. Cody Williams is one of my favorite prospects in the entire draft. He's probably my 3rd favorite prospect out of everybody. Dillingham, then Shepard, Dillingham, then Castle, then Cody Williams. Those are my 3 guys. But Cody Williams is a guy who I was not expecting to fall at 10. He's kind of fallen the past couple months, especially when he went to Colorado. And then they got Isaiah Collier, who was supposed to be a top 5 pick a year ago, and they got him at 29. And then they get Kyle Filipowski, who, if you watch my podcast, I'm not a big fan of Filipowski, but I thought he was going to go in the 1st round. He's definitely a 1st-round talent. He ended up going in the 2nd round in that 2nd pick. Great pickups from the Jazz, and that's why they get such a high rating at a B+, because they killed the draft. And then the last one we have the Wizards getting a C. And I kind of wanted to give them higher because I think they got the best guy in the draft in Alex Sarr. And then they also got Bub Carrington, who I think is going to be a heck of a player. Besides that, they didn't do much. They added Malcolm Brogdon. They added Jonas Valanciunas. I don't know why they wanted Jonas Valanciunas. And then Denny Avdia was a guy who I did not want to leave. I really liked Denny Avdia. And I thought he was going to be able to stay in a Wizards jersey, but he was not. Besides that, the Wizards didn't do much, and they get a C for me. So that is the video today. I hope y'all didn't find it too boring. Kind of a fun little video, taking y'all through every single team, exactly what they were able to do, right? Because some people don't realize teams did these little things and that boosts their rating. And then taking y'all back kind of through the draft, because I didn't make a draft video, and I kind of wanted to look back at the draft. So let me know what y'all think. Let me know if my rating is good for your favorite team. And I'll see y'all later. Peace out, guys.